Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you, Nancy, and the Arts, Culture, Health, Wellbeing Scotland, and to the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival for having us for this lunchtime conversation and to providing this platform to share a bit more about the work that we're doing at Counterpoints Arts and to be in conversation with two incredible practitioners who I'll introduce shortly. So my name is Daniela Nofal. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a producer at Counterpoints Arts, and I'm working on a new strand of work that we launched earlier this year, focusing on mental health, displacement, and the arts. As you're settling in, I invite you to also share and introduce yourselves. If you'd like to write your names and maybe where you're joining us from today. Often these online spaces can be a bit alienating, so it'd be really nice to connect. And I invite you to also to share any comments. You can also share the love as well with our guests today and any questions that you have. There will also be some time at the end for some questions, so please keep note of those and we'll invite you to share them at the end. So before I dive into the work of Counterpoints, I'm really excited to be joined today by two incredible creative practitioners, Mariam Omari and Vicky Inam Mahieddin, who are here with us today. And we thought, what better way to shed light on some of the questions that have been animating the work we're doing at Counterpoints and some of the questions we've been thinking about than to be in conversation with fellow artists and practitioners. And so we'll have time to be in conversation a little bit in a few moments. But before we go there, I thought I would share a bit more information about the work of Counterpoints Arts. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Counterpoints Arts is an arts organization that specializes in the field of migration, displacement, and social change. Our mission is to support and produce the arts by and about migrants and refugees to make sure that their voices, creativity, contributions are recognized and welcomed within our arts, our history, and our culture. As an organization, we're based in London, but we also work internationally. And we run various strands and programs such as Refugee Week, which the equivalent in Scotland is Refugee Festival Scotland, which is a week-long festival that celebrates the creativity and resilience of refugees, where anyone is able to take part and to host an event. We also run Pop Change, which is a strand of work focusing on the role of popular culture and social change through film, TV, and comedy. We also run Platforma, which is a biannual festival where we go to different regions across the country, where we work with creative networks to host a festival focusing on migration and displacement and to build capacity around that. And more recently, and which is why we're here today, is we've launched a new strand of work focusing on mental health and displacement. As an organization, mental health has always been implicit in our work, given the nature of our work, but we're very excited that it's now becoming more explicit as we're developing an entire program around it. We recognize the excruciating toll it takes to be displaced by war, by climate catastrophe, as a result of fear of persecution, and how this painful experience is often compounded by the treacherous and dangerous journeys many people have to take as a result of violent border regimes that are in place to keep people out. And we realize that the harm doesn't end there. Many of those who do survive those journeys are often welcomed in the UK by the hostile environment and the set of policies that are in place to make life unbearable and unlivable. And so we recognize the various facets and how these can have a compounding and negative effect on the mental health and well-being of those navigating the asylum system. And with that as a starting point for us, we believe that the arts can play a powerful role in supporting those who have been affected by navigating these violent systems. And The work for us really began last year when we were commissioned by the Bering Foundation to put together a report as part of their Creatively Minded series that invited 12 case studies and organizations and initiatives to reflect on the role of the arts and how they use it and embed it within their programs to support the mental health and well-being of the communities they work with. I'll put a link to the report in the chat. It's free to download and anyone can have access to it. So I invite you to check it out. But since the launch of the report, we've developed a 2-year pilot program, which is running across 2024 and 2025, which is a multifaceted program that's really kind of diving into that question is what is the role of the arts and how can we do this work well? And so the program is really divided into 2 key areas, which I'll touch on now. The first is really around creative programming and commissioning new work. So it's about working with artists who are working around these questions around displacement and mental health, commissioning artists to develop new work, particularly participatory work, which will allow us to dive deeper into how artists do this work, and what is the role of the arts in supporting those who are involved in the projects through various art forms such as singing, movement, comedy, film, and really thinking about the specificities of each art form. And then we're taking these works and working in partnership with arts venues and institutions to bring these works to the fore of their programming as a way to mainstream the conversation around mental health and displacement. The second key dimension of the program is around developing a network. So over the next 2 years, we are building and nurturing a network of practitioners who are working across the arts, health, and migration sectors as a way to build connections, to find moments to collaborate, and to amplify the incredible work that's happening at this intersection. Over the next 2 years, we'll be hosting 4 gatherings, as we're naming them, across the 4 nations as a way to help us build this network and to share learning and to reflect on good practice. And our first event in the series was actually held in Glasgow, as Nancy shared earlier. And it was such a privilege to be able to visit Glasgow and to connect with all the amazing practitioners there and to gain access into so many resources that are created in Scotland as well. And that's what really brings us here today to Scotland as well, and to be part of the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival, and where I've managed to connect with Nancy, but also the team behind the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival, as well as Miriam and Vicky. So I hope that has helped offer some context about the work we do and some of the work that we're going to be doing over the next 2 years as well. Our door is always open at Counterpoints, so if you'd like to connect or reach out, please feel free to do so. I'll share my email in the chat as well. And for now, I'd like to move on to the more exciting and juicier part of today's session, and where I'll be in conversation with Mariam and Vicky, who are here with us today. So I'll very quickly introduce you to them. Mariam is a playwright, screenwriter, and artistic director and co-founder of Bijli Productions. Her productions are described as political, sensitive, and compelling, often confronting societal taboos. Mariam left Australia for her father's homeland in the Middle East to work as a humanitarian. This inspired her commitment to promoting stories that strengthen the voice for equality. Her next move was to her mother's homeland, Scotland, where she has been working closely with ethnically diverse communities. She was one of the National Theatre of Scotland's Starter for 10, selected to develop her play, One Mississippi, which showcased at the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival in 2017 and toured nationally in 2022. She had 3 plays commissioned in 2019, The Trojans, performed by Syrian refugees, Paper Memories in 2019 as part of the National Puppetry and Animation Festival, and Walk in the Line, which was part of the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival in 2019. In 2021, she was commissioned by BBC Scotland to create Breaking Point, a series of 5 short monologues for radio and digital platforms based on the stories from One Mississippi. She is currently developing her first feature for Young Films and BBC Film and is working on a documentary about the making of One Mississippi. Wow, what a pleasure to have you with us, Mariam. I'll now introduce Vicky quickly. Vicky Inem Mohiddin is a Scots-Lebanese creative well-being practitioner and HCPC registered drama therapist. Vicky has over 15 years experience of facilitating and producing creative community projects in China, India, and the UK. Utilizing story, myth, movement, and art making, Vicky creates spaces for people to explore challenging feelings and experiences through creativity. She has created projects for organisations including National Theatre of Scotland, British Red Cross, Historic Environment Scotland, Safe in Scotland, Amina, NHS Borders, and Dundee Reps Drama Therapy Department. Vicky, very warm welcome to you as well. It's so wonderful to be here with you both. Thank you for making the time. And just reading your bios is there's so much experience in this space and in this room. And it's going to be hard to touch on everything during the session, but I hope we'll be able to have as much of a rich conversation as we can. How are you both?
Thanks so much, Daniela. Great. It's lovely to be here. And it's wonderful to see, well, at least connect digitally with everyone today.
Yeah, and hello, everybody. I am just, as a little bit of context, based down in the Scottish Borders. So I know there's a lot of Glasgow-based people, but it was interesting looking at the chat and seeing that actually there's people from all over joining today. So that's nice.
Great. Well, it's so great to have you with us. Thank you for making the time. And I thought maybe to get us started, I'd kick off with a little context setting or get put out a little question and see how we can find out a bit more about how you work as practitioners and what value you see in doing the work that you do and the role of the arts when working with communities who've been affected by displacement and navigating the hostile environment. So I'd love to hear about how you both see your projects as vessels of sanctuary, and why the arts, and how can it support the mental health of those navigating the asylum system. And perhaps you can touch on one or two or many of the projects I read in your bios about how you embed a focus of mental health in the work that you do, you know, from inception to delivery and implementation to finishing a project. I think it would be lovely to find out more about how you work.
But in like 90 seconds, right? I'll jump in. Just because I've just come off of quite a recent project, the weekend before last, which is one of the reasons why I couldn't come along to the event in Glasgow with you both. With the British Red Cross, I've been working with their mums group, the Refugee Service Mums group, and they arranged a residential in which they haven't done since before COVID, but they used to do quite regularly, where they take the mums and the kids away and do different activities and try and do some activities solely for the mums and you know, different things. But I've been working with the group on and off for a year, and they thought the sort of combination of mental health well-being and art making or creativity, different creative projects might be a nice thing to base it around, actually. So it was a really lovely 2-day project. We were down in Berwick upon Tweed, actually, so just over the border. 5 women, and I think there was like 17 kids. So it was, you know, it was, I know, but it's a really lovely project. And the Red Cross team did childcare, basically. They looked after the children so that we were able to work together without distraction. And, you know, really, when I read the word sanctuary and I thought about that, I feel like so much of the work that I've been really doing recently, especially over the last couple of years, has been really focusing on this idea of space, relief, respite. And I think that we'll probably go into this a bit more, but there's so many political, logistical, institutional things that cannot be overcome easily through art making or performance, but affect everything that we do. And so much of the consideration that I give projects when I'm designing them now is about how can we reduce distraction, how can we create a true space for focusing on this one thing, whether that is art making. And I suppose in some ways it's deprioritized the art form in favor of also considering space, also considering nature a lot of the time. So we went to the beach, we made a huge beach artwork with shells, and it is a really lovely project. And I just got some feedback from the women verbatim, and I was reading through it before today, and every single one of them said two words that was common between them all. One was happy and one was relaxed. And so I feel like that's really, we overcomplicate it, I think. I'm not an academic, but I think, yeah, if people are finishing the project happy and relaxed for a bit, that's good. I don't know if that's, I'm opening. There you go. There's a little opening.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That's such a generous opening. And I think you've really summarized a lot of the conversation we had at the Holding Space event, where many of the speakers and people in the room were speaking to this idea of the importance of creating that space and the parameters of that space, and how small decisions and small details can really offer a holding space, where people can come and feel safe and access those parts of themselves that are often shut down when you're confronted by so much violence and when you're trying to survive. And think about, take day by day, when you create this little haven, this space of sanctuary, it does allow, being able to access those parts that we can feel silly or happy, or allow the stress in our bodies to kind of move down a level. So yeah, thank you so much, Vicky. That was really a great starting point. And Miriam, how about for you?
I think the points that Vicky's made about happy and relaxed are some of the most powerful outcomes from some of our projects. And if I kind of rewind back to the entry point for us for some of the projects we made, in terms of my own practice, I had originally been in theatre in Australia. And then when I was working as a humanitarian for Médecins Sans Frontières and Care International, it was during the Arab revolutions, and or the Arab Spring, as they called it. And I was taking testimony from women in particular who had experienced violence during the uprisings. And I started to recognize during that time how very powerful just being fully present and listening to the women giving their testimony was having a positive impact based on their feedback. So bringing that to Scotland, and then the projects and the work of Bidgley, this is, the seed was planted there, and combining that with theatre practice. The focus for me was originally kind of looking at verbatim theatre or documentary theatre, and how can I combine that practice with the ultimate goal of a sense of well-being in the people that are part of it. And the people that I was interviewing for those verbatim shows, like If I Had a Girl, My Mississippi, again reinforced the power of this process. And I'll just add very quickly, there is a full guidance that Vicky and I and John McCormack created for We Make the Path, which details all the steps, all the ways in which we approach this. And I can give you a link to share, Daniela, with everyone. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of that, because anyone here is absolutely welcome to access that guidance. So building on those steps, and my own father's family were refugees that had fled originally Kurdistan and then Lebanon. And so having had that experience of being the child of a refugee, while being very mindful of the fact that it is not my direct experience, I was kind of pulling at all of these strings to look at, well, how can we then take these practices and these what we're seeing as these outcomes and embed it in a way that we can create something that better serves the community of the people that are now displaced by the wars we were seeing, and Glasgow being a host city. And this led to the project which I referred to called We Make the Path. Prior to that, Vicky and I had met in other projects, such as the Trojans, and we had experiences there with, I think, was it 27 or 29 Syrian refugees, Vicky? Might have been more. A lot. And so a lot of people, and looking at how they were experiencing making theatre, and also how there were things that perhaps we had to question within ourselves, and also question about the practice, and then how do we learn from that. So in terms of creating sanctuary, those mistakes that were made in other projects fully served us to be able to ensure that we never replicated those mistakes with people who had been displaced by war or asylum seekers. And as a result, as Vicky said, the most important thing was not the art form when we started to apply for funding for these projects, but rather, what are we creating in the room in order to elevate or to support the agency of these people and their needs on an emotional, physical, spiritual, and so on level. And I'll just touch on quickly the work that we do prior to starting projects, which is incredibly important, is research. And before we did this, my colleague, John McCormack, who was working for Scottish Recovery Network, took me across to Derry Playhouse, because I had been mentored by a woman there, Taya Sepniak, who did Theatre of Witness. And so a lot of my work involved researching, for example, she was working there with ex-combatants, and working in that unique space that we know has been the history of Northern Ireland. And then really kind of mining other organizations that were working with vulnerable people, and then taking that and combining that with what we knew, learning from Refugee Council and Refugee, and also our own unique experiences, and using that to inform the way we created this program. And on top of that, going out to the community themselves of people who have been displaced to ask, if we were to create this, what would you need? So it was not us setting the agenda, but rather us creating the opportunity for the people who would come to set the agenda. So I'll just stop there, and sort of, there were three big questions in there, Daniela. So
no, that's great. That's amazing, right? I think you've touched on so many things around the power of testimony and being able to share one's story, especially when in a system that doesn't allow you to speak for yourself, and can strip away that sense of agency, but also around making mistakes, and how we all make mistakes, and often the work is around harm reduction, doing the best we can to reduce the harm in the work that we do, and knowing that we will make mistakes, but also owning up to those mistakes when those are happening, and having processes of repair that can be embedded into the project's design. But also around you echoing what Vicky said about not putting the art form at the heart of it, but thinking about everything else that comes into it, which is so valuable. And I wonder, because you've both worked together, what are some of the tensions between delivering an art project or final output that you've promised an arts organization you've worked with or you've been commissioned to do, and then focusing on the needs and the mental health and well-being of the individuals who are involved in the project and the participants? And maybe you can shine a light on how those tensions might have showed up for you in your projects and how you've navigated that in the work.
I'd wanted to jump in when Mariam was speaking about the Trojans, because obviously it activates me. Because it was, yeah, which is how we ended up continuing to work together a bit more, I think, because we started having lots of long conversations about how we felt and what was happening. And I think for me, it on that and the question you just asked, I think there's the question of intention and integrity, maybe, and what can be, especially in this difficult environment in terms of funding and support and competition and all of these things, is I think that Mariam actually does this better than probably anyone I've worked with, is people do not, I mean, you do this, saying other people do not spend the time at the beginning working out your values, why you're doing the work. And I think that if you're making work to make something beautiful, that's okay. You're allowed to do that, but you should be really, really aware of it. And if you are intending to make work that is healing or that is primarily to enhance well-being, then that has to be at the forefront. And those things can be intention, but you can help reduce potential issues by doing that work first. And I think that, a lot of the times on We Make the Path, where there were like artistic questions or any questions, you can go back to and I felt like we did go back to quite often the values of Bidgley, which was, we're not going to buy this plastic stuff because I know already that I don't want to do that, right? Whereas if you're trying to make the decision and at the time and going like, oh, well, how do I feel about this? And what is the most important thing for me? So I think there's a lot of work that I think it's responsible for practitioners working at this intersection of art, mental health, and displaced people. Those are three very like vulnerable, kind of spiky, potentially difficult things, is to kind of go, well, why am I doing it? And not, oh, well, I should be doing it for this reason. That way is where you get yourself into some trouble. It's genuinely, what do I want and why? And then keep checking in with yourself, because you change and you have different ambitions. I mean, let's not go into my artistic history, but I didn't like go, right, I'm 16 and I'm gonna be a like drama therapist working in this role, blah blah blah. You follow your path. I don't know. I'm sort of like drifting. I don't know what I'm doing. Someone else speak.
Oh, well, I think, Vicky, the most important word you mentioned is intention. And I think sometimes people, producers, funders, they all have their own intentions of what they want done and how they want things delivered. And I mentioned this at our gathering, Daniela, on the 11th. So what I do, and I know Vicky works with this, we're a little bit maybe radical at times in the way we approach things, or subversive might be a better word. I will tell funders, this is what I am aspiring to do. And I will indicate an art form, especially when I'm dealing with a funder who has very rigid guidelines around what it is they want delivered. And that is not uncommon, as we know. Funders are getting better, in my experience, over the last decade, but they still have, this, and everyone here will probably have experienced it in one form or another. And so it'll be a case of saying, we're going to make a theatre show, we're working with this group, everyone's PVG, so to work with protected vulnerable, so working with vulnerable people, this is the approach we're going to take. However, let's take We Make the Path as an example with Vicky. After we'd done all that research and we'd got the funding, and we got a good chunk of funding, we were very fortunate, we quickly realized that that was not what we were going to make, because we were not dictating the terms to the women. And it happened to be that in the end, they were all women who were displaced, asylum, refugee status. So that were attending, and we were coming out of COVID. So we were doing a hybrid model of working online and Vicky working with them in person. What we quickly realized is that, yes, we thought we were going to work online. We're now working in person. We don't have childcare. So we just created budget lines. I just created budget lines. And it's, it's that old saying of better to, what is it, seek forgiveness than to ask permission. I just did it because it was what the women needed. And we were working so closely with what their needs were. And as a result, I would be able to then negotiate those challenges with the funder and say, because at the end of the day, the funder has given us money because they want us to succeed. And that's the thing we have to often realize, because we can be very black and white about funders. If you can develop a relationship with them and they are heavily invested in wanting to ensure that you are able to create something with people who have been displaced, who have their own mental health challenges, and this is part of the funder's remit, they're on your side. They don't like taking money back. So if the intention, coming back to what Vicky said, is to serve the work and serve the people making the work, which is ultimately not us, which is ultimately a group, then you have to facilitate that in any way you can. And by making those small changes, and then the women saying, we don't want to do a theatre show. And Vicky going, okay, what would you like to do? And them dictating the terms, what we made was so beautiful and so powerful. And to quote the women, help them to trust, to feel strong again, to create something that they never thought they could create, to feel loved, to have changed them forever. So this is what matters.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing those.
Sorry, Daniela.
Yeah, go, Vicky, go.
No, I was just, I love, there's so many elements of that project that I don't remember as strongly because I was delivering, which is such a gorgeous place to be, and I didn't have to worry about budget lines. But I did work on a project recently, much smaller scale, where I'm not working with displaced people, but a lot of really like transferable problems, challenges, we say. And I didn't think it was going to work out. We are all, I always say this, we are all under so many pressures just now, venues, people who work for the council, participants, everybody. And it was just too hard. And I went back to the funders and I said, look, this isn't going to happen the way that, like, it certainly isn't going to happen when I said it was going to happen. And here are some options for you. And they came back to me and they were like, oh, thank you so much for your honesty. And they mentioned the word honesty like 6 times in this email. And number one, they did not, apart from anything else, want to have to deal with having to take this money back. But I was like kind of surprised. And I was like, why are they going on and on about the honesty so much? And I realized it's because in so many parts of our lives, we're like, this will make this person treat me this way if I tell them this, right? And that's like in every form of our life. And I just don't do that. Well, not with funders. And it is like to be honest with yourself, but also with other people, like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And then let's see what happens. But the idea that someone is going to say, right, that's it, you're never working in this industry again, we're taking all your money back, is very unlikely. But I just wanted to mention that because it really stayed with me, that idea that they were like, thank you for telling us, and not just trying to do it and then having a little breakdown.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're really emphasizing the point around the need for flexibility within these projects, is that you have to allow for what's there to come up and to respond to what the needs of the group are. And you can't know that in advance until you're actually together and doing the work together. And if it is going to have that positive healing impact, then it has to be responsive to the here and now. But you've also been kind of leading us to the next kind of questions, which are around some of the challenges and opportunities you as artists are faced and confronted by when doing this work. On the one hand, when you are working with communities who are often failed by public systems, you as artists have to fill in those gaps, and you are also often stewarding the trauma and the pain that others are carrying. So on the one hand, my question is, how do you look after yourselves as practitioners? And what are some of those challenges that you are confronted by, and how can funders, arts organizations, commissioners, partners make necessary changes to support you in doing the work that you do well, for you to feel well in doing that work? I know it's also another big question, but feel free to jump in at it from any angle that you'd like and feels relevant to you.
Well, I think what has been a very fortunate part of my learning is the importance of having a psychotherapist or a drama therapist like Vicky as part of the project, because not only do you have that level of experience and skill on the project for the people who are participating, you have it for the team. And that was something I never fully appreciated in the beginning of my journey of working with vulnerable people, or working on my my verbatim shows where I was making work for National Theatre Development, and so I never conceived of the idea of needing any kind of emotional support, despite the fact that I was working on incredibly difficult subject matter. And I think I underestimated the impact that would have, working through and transcribing a lot of very harrowing stories, despite the fact that I was doing this in my previous work in the Middle East. In the Middle East, as a humanitarian, you have that constantly, wellbeing officers and psychotherapists and people to check in on you. But as an independent freelance artist, you're kind of operating, you get Creative Scotland funding, and I did not justify that for myself, because I want to pay my actors well, I want to pay the team well. But that changed, and I'm glad it changed, because John McCormack, who I was working with at the time, who was helping with the Alliance funding and then went on to be a part of this We Make the Path project, is a psychotherapist, and Vicky was en route to fully qualifying as a drama therapist. And so as a result, we could speak about where we were at and what the challenges were for us. And it felt you could be very open and honest about that. And that really helped me look after myself, although I was not in the thick of the facilitation week to week like Vicky was. I think that building that in, and we had built that into the funding application, is one way to overcome the challenge of not doing it for yourself. And it's becoming, I know, more and more people who are making work about mental health and their own mental health are being advised to think about how you embed into your funding and your project someone who can provide that support for you, who's out with the team or your immediate family, that you can just speak openly about, who understands the process of making art about difficult subjects. And I think also, you know, what I wanted to say as well is I can never underestimate the power of, even if there were challenging moments in the project, watching, for example, one of the big things that happened was the women in We Make the Path, watching them change and their confidence grow. And so, you know, they model and each other. And one of the women had never left her child. and she was terrified of leaving her child. And she saw the other women going, oh, we can get childcare and we can leave our children. And for the first time ever, she left her child with one of the other women's children in the childcare that we'd arranged. And she was so, I mean, she was stressed, but she was also so overjoyed at this small thing she did. One of the other women caught a taxi for the first time ever. And she was so excited that she rang her husband when she arrived. Then the thing we should say is we were always working in really great spaces that were partner spaces, like Amana Muslim Women's Resource Centre or Refugee. So they're spaces the women felt very welcomed in and very safe in. And so they, you know, when they arrived, come and they're just like, I caught a taxi. And these things, these small things, they elevate, they take you out of anything that might be challenging or difficult.
Thank you, Mariam. How about for you, Vicky?
Yeah, I'm just remembering of it's I had similar experiences just on the change and seeing this stuff on the project that I did the week before last, where one of the challenges was that in some of the sessions we were doing, the children were in a room next door, and you could see this like very codependent relationship, of course, naturally between a child and a mother, where we had to like really physically be like, they are okay, you don't need to speak to them, and that group support of we can do an hour and a half without texting our kids in the next room is like massively challenging. And I think it's being able to think through that these little things, you might not predict what the little thing is. And again, it comes back to that thing of having space and having time, and having space and time so that you're not trying to do like this really complicated, whatever artistic, dramatic, creative thing in the workshop. You have a little thing that you're doing and you've got lots of time around it, so that you're not going like, come on, we've got to finish this, and putting that stress on someone. And then also that you have space and time as a team to, firstly, yes, put the funding in to have a team, don't do it on your own, and the space and time that is supported financially to be able to talk about these things and reflect, so that you're not just going to the next thing. And I think that's one of the biggest changes I've made in my personal professional life is building these spaces. And it really started in COVID, when it was really like everything got really specific and pure because of so many things fell away. And I was like, I need 15 minutes before this Zoom where I will just like brain dump in a journal or whatever it is. There's always buffers. I buffer everything now. And there's a project that I worked on actually during, I think we started in 2020 into 2021 with Amina, which is, it's still up online. It's called A Life in the Time exhibition, where it ended up, it was an online art project, but it exploded because there was a sort of unexpected lockdown in January, and we were doing the workshops in January, and suddenly all these women that different parts of Amina were supporting, like needed something to do or had to do something. So we ended up working with too many people and it was a huge project. But because I had a sort of, I was thinking about it from a well-being first sort of mindset, we had this all built in, and I worked with me personally, because I was working on my own. I had a team, but this was lockdown and it was me in my house doing everything, you know. And I scheduled in just something like 3 or 4 sessions over the course of 6 months with an art therapist, who was like a consultant. And then I would just have a chat with her and say, this is what we're doing. And she's like, doesn't sound like you've allowed yourself time for this, or have you thought about that? And just, I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Someone else to kind of help. And also just, yeah, like Mariam said, that importance of having someone who isn't intimately involved in what you're doing and therefore necessarily affected by it in the same way, but has some understanding of like what you're doing. And building those networks is a big part of it, I think, so that you could go. And I think that Mariam and I have spoken about this a lot, of this, the way, because we both worked extensively in other countries and cultures, and here in the UK and Scotland, it's like, this is the path, you go Creative Scotland, and if they're not going to fund it, then like I've hit a dead end. And and it like inevitably breeds a certain amount of competition and a like me when it comes to making work. I've seen it in the third sector, I've seen it in the artistic, it's in mental health, every single unstably funded sector has the same you can fall into the trap whether you want to or not. Resisting that, working together, sharing information, sharing ideas, openly saying, we did this, look what we did, you go try it. And that is, for me, is 100% the path to like greater well-being for all of us, is to work together more, and to be generous, and not to be worried that anything there's going to be you giving breeds more good stuff, so that's my I'm gonna say that.
Thank you, Vicky. And that reminds me of something we first touched on, Mariam, when we spoke, and that what you saying exactly the same that you said, Vicky, around this sense of hope and possibility in light of so many structural challenges and barriers that prevent people from doing this work well, and the importance of being able to come together and resource ourselves differently and be resourceful, as you said, Mariam. And so on that, I wonder if anyone has any questions. We have just under 10 minutes to go. Would be great to get some more voices in the space. Feel free to raise your hands, and we can or unmute yourself, and we can take your question or any reflections that you have. We'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts.
And Daniela, Bess does have one question in the chat.
Yes.
So
you want to go for it, Mariam? Read it.
Yeah, so do you propose and plan for a psychotherapist or drama therapist in your funding applications? Yes, we have. We have embedded it within the last couple of big funding applications. And the funders were delighted because it showed, because they were participatory projects, We Make the Path, for example, and working with vulnerable people, and also not only our duty of care to who we are working with, but to our team and ourselves. There was no question around including that budget line.
Also,
thank you.
If I can add, I don't know how it is with Creative Scotland, but I know in England with Arts Council, for example, they've recently added a new line that covers kind of needs around health, around therapy or additional support to run creative health projects. And I think that's kind of where hopefully funders are going towards, is recognizing the immensity of taking on these projects and the type of support needed. Jess, it would be great to hear from you.
Hi, 1 second. Is my audio working fine?
Yes, we hear you.
I also just want to be mindful that I've not like cut in front of anyone in line, because I see a few people have come off camera, and I don't know if I accidentally I'm happy to go ask a question. Yes.
Go for it.
Sorry, I'm trying. My video is really bad. Hi. So mindful of time, trying to be brief. I know I'm not trying to add a really juicy, hard question here. But for myself, I'm a lived experience researcher, which means like I'm also like a survivor, and I have like my own experiences with mental health myself. But I'm also a practitioner in that I was trained as a peer support worker, and I also am registered as a drama therapist in the US. And I'm just always thinking about how we navigate these spaces, because often I find when we enter a space, there might be a level of distrust, and rightfully so, especially if people have, as you mentioned earlier, Daniela, have experienced violence at the hand of systems, right? So if people are survivors of like psychiatric violence, or had some discriminatory experiences at mental health services, if you're introducing like, okay, hello, I'm a facilitator, and also we are going to be joined by such and such practitioner, like I just wonder how you navigate any like awkwardness or open conversations about things like this, and also acknowledging that maybe like just the power dynamic stuff is what I'm asking about. If that makes sense. Sorry for the loaded question.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Jess, for bringing that into the space. Mariam, Vicky, would you like to answer?
Great.
I think Mariam and I worked on a workshop that we facilitated separately but designed together, which I still love that we did that. There was, yeah, I was going to say you had some really great. We spoke about the power thing, so I'll throw over to you there.
I think it's very interesting. It's a great question, Jess. So the way that we proceed always, I've done a bit of a dive into power a few years back, and I never really fully understood. I know from working with women human rights defenders and being in the women's rights space for a while there, and in my work, very enmeshed in it. I've never left it, by the way. I understood it just thinking about it from a patriarchal perspective and what have you, but I never really understood the immediate power dynamics that could happen in a room like you described, Jess, and like what Vicky's talking about. So the attitude has always been, I say this over and over, is rather than power over, it's power to, and how do you then facilitate that, but also knowing that there are people who experience their own power differently, depending on what setting you put them in. So they may feel very empowered in one space and very disempowered in another space. And these are the kinds of things that I know Vicky and I, in terms of that particular workshop, it became, a challenge, because it's the perception, isn't it? It's always the perception of where anyone is at. Do you want to add something on power, Vicky, before I mention navigating the distrust? Oh, okay. So in terms of just like the level of distrust and people, you're absolutely right. And it's needing to find a way. But if you recall, I mentioned the research. If there has already been a trusted organization or interaction and introduction via a trusted organization, it immediately sets you up in a better place to begin that facilitation. I never recommend, nor do I go into group work cold. I always look for a way to have had some form of invitation or interaction or introduction. And then just on that, We Make the Path, originally myself and John McCormack were thinking we would work with people who self-manage their mental health and who have long-term mental health conditions. And this was the original idea. However, when we realized that the people that were interested and we were speaking to during the research phase happened to be people who were displaced and predominantly women, John stepped away. He stepped back, and it was a gift, because he had done all of the groundwork but had to step back because he knew that his presence as a white Scottish man in that room was not going to serve or create any trust. And it was Vicky that had to be the one in that room with myself coming in and out. And so Vicky and I, between us, our Arabic's not too bad, but using also language and our own understanding and vulnerabilities to navigate the space became an incredibly useful tool, while also acknowledging the fact that there were certain people that could not come into that space because they just would not make the women comfortable. Would you agree, Vicky?
Yeah, I would. And I'd just briefly add on that, because I know we're coming up to time. I did think of something to say about power. Really briefly, just acknowledge your power in the space is a really good starting point. Now, that's your mission, everyone in this chat. Go and meditate on that for a while. Because no matter who you are, what your lived experience is, or who you're with, you as a facilitator, whatever, you have power in the space. And on the respect thing, I just want to come back to the values thing. I've been working a lot really closely with the Kurdish women's community in Glasgow, which is a really specific group. It's very different from work I do, which is people from different cultures, and that has its own difficulty. This is like one group, and it's ruled with an iron fist by one of the volunteers who has really strict rules about gossip, talking on behalf of other people. And sometimes that feels uncomfortable when you're in a space going, no, don't say that. But setting boundaries at the beginning, first being honest about them and upfront and transparent at the beginning, really, really helps in some situations. And part of the feedback we got was, I felt respected. We had a chance to listen to each other without judgment. And I think sometimes we like really trip over ourselves and we overcomplicate things, and we're really worried about being, you know, like savior types and all of this kind of stuff. And so anything you want to say is fine. And it's like, it's your job to keep people safe. You are not a participant. You do have power, but you also have responsibility. And don't make it up as you go along, I guess. You know, like, be honest at the beginning. We're not gonna, these are some of our red lines. What are yours? Let's make a contract and then let's stick to that contract, actually. Anyway, now I'm getting into it and I could go on forever, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you both, Miriam and Vicky. I know we could spend I personally could spend days talking to you and really like dissecting, but I'm conscious of time, and Nancy has said that, yeah, that we have reached time as well. So thank you both for being here and in conversation with me. It was lovely to speak with you. And thank you also to everyone who asked questions.
Thank you so much, Daniela. It was lovely to spend time with you all this afternoon, and so lovely to be reconnected to the wonderful Vicky.
Oh, yes, same. Lovely to see some familiar faces in the crowd as well.
And thank you to you, Nancy, for hosting and organizing. We can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Yes, now you're back.
Okay, so I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm actually at the Voluntary Health Scotland conference today. But all I would add to that is there is one more session tomorrow, if anybody's interested, which is about performing anxiety, which is a tool developed by the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival and the Mental Health Foundation, to do with those practitioners working in this space or creating work linked in with mental health. There's never enough time for a conversation like this, so I just thank everybody for joining in and taking part. And if you want to kind of keep an eye on other things that we're doing, if you go to the ACHUS website or sign up for the newsletter, you'll know about all the conversations we've got going on. I would love to catch up with Vicky and Mariam and just see if there's ways we can take some of these things forward and also help shape some of the wider conversations we're having about where this sits in funding and other strategies. So I will leave it there, let everybody get on. Thank you very much for everything, and thank you to everyone who took part and everyone who joined.
Take care, everyone. Hopefully see you soon. Have a lovely day.
Danielle, are you happy if I end the call, or do you want
Yes.
to just touch base with each
Yeah,
other?
I would. Is it okay just to say thank you? And it was such a delight to speak with you all and to have this opportunity. Thank you so much. I know I was barely scratching the surface, and I wanted to spend more time speaking with you.
Thank you. No, it was amazing. And yeah, like Vicky said, we could do like,
No, I just started getting into it at the end.
yeah, no, you weren't. You were totally into it. It was amazing. I was just going to add that, as I mentioned, we have a detailed guidance of how we created We Make the Path, how we ran the sessions, and some of the, you know, wonderful quotes from the women that were part of it, along with beautiful images of their final performance. So I am happy to send you a copy of that, and you please share far and wide. People think, like Vicky said, that, you know, people are closed book, but our attitude has always been, how much can we give